Rancher bets 10 million until a beggar shows up and makes him regret it. Richard Whitehall never imagined that a simple bet at the annual Dallas auction would completely change his life. The man who controlled the largest cattle ranch in the region was used to always having the final say. That was when he stepped onto the stage of the packed pavilion and made an announcement that left everyone stunned. Chest puffed with pride, Richard pointed to Emperor, his champion Angus bull, and boasted to the over 300 breeders present that he'd bet $10 million no animal in the region could defeat his bull in any kind of challenge over the next 30 days. The crowd murmured in awe. 10 million wasn't just any amount, even by Texas rural elite standards. Richard smiled with satisfaction at the impact of his words. At 52, he had built an empire from nothing and made sure everyone knew it. It could be strength, it could be endurance, it could be anything you want, Richard continued, adjusting his genuine leather cowboy hat. Emperor will prove why he's the best breeder in the United States. The other ranchers exchanged nervous glances. They knew Emperor's reputation well. The nearly 1-ton black bull had won every competition in the last 5 years. He was truly an exceptional animal. And if anyone here has the guts to take my bet, Richard laughed loudly, I'll pay on the spot. Money isn't a problem for those who know how to work. The comment drew nervous chuckles from the crowd, but also a few disapproving looks. Richard had always been known for his arrogance, but in recent years it had only grown worse. Ever since his wife Margaret had moved to New York with their son Michael, the rancher seemed to have lost whatever trace of humility he might have had left. It was then that an unexpected figure caught everyone's attention. A black man looking to be about 45 with graying dreadlocks and simple worn-out clothes slowly approached the pen where Emperor stood. His calloused hands and steady stride stood in stark contrast to the auction's luxurious setting. "Well, would you look at that?" Richard pointed at the man, provoking laughter. "Even a beggar showed up today. Did someone forget to tell him this event is for serious people only?" The man didn't seem bothered by the mockery. He kept walking until he was right next to the pen. Emperor, who was usually aggressive with strangers, surprisingly calmed down at the sight of the newcomer. "Hey, you there!" Richard shouted from the stage. "Get away from my bull before he hurts you!" The man with dreadlocks looked straight at Richard, then turned to Emperor. He whispered something so softly no one could hear. To the astonishment of everyone present, the massive bull slowly lowered his front legs and lay down on the ground like an obedient dog. Silence fell over the pavilion. Emperor had never done this with a stranger before. In fact, only 2 handlers on the ranch could safely approach him. Richard stormed off the stage, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "What did you do to my bull?" he yelled, marching toward the man. "Nothing much," the man replied in a calm, deep voice. "Just talked to him." "Talked?" Richard laughed nervously. "Bulls don't talk, you lunatic." "All animals talk," the man said, gently stroking Emperor's muzzle. "The trick is knowing how to listen." The situation was becoming humiliating for Richard. Some ranchers began to chuckle under their breath, while others seemed genuinely impressed by the scene. "Fine," Richard tried to regain control. "Beginner's luck. Emperor's just tired, that's all. I can make him stand up and lie down as many times as I want," the man said calmly. "Oh, really?" Richard felt a mix of anger and curiosity. "Then prove it," the man whispered again to Emperor, who immediately stood up. Another whisper and the bull lay down again. The crowd began murmuring louder. Richard felt he was losing control of the situation. His reputation was at stake in front of all the ranchers in the region. "Listen here, you..." He stopped, searching for the right words. "I'll double my bet. $20 million to whoever can make my bull obey a complete stranger for more than 5 minutes. The man with dreadlocks smiled for the first time. "I accept your bet," he said, "but on one condition." "What condition?" Richard asked suspiciously. "You'll work by my side for 30 days. Every day, from sunrise to sunset." The crowd let out a collective, "Oh!" The proposal was unusual and, in a way, humiliating for a man of Richard's standing. "Are you crazy?" Richard laughed loudly. "I don't work for anyone. I'm the boss here." "So you don't have the guts to accept your own bet?" the man asked calmly. Richard felt everyone's eyes on him. His reputation as a fearless man was being publicly questioned. The silence in the pavilion was deafening. "I accept any challenge," Richard said, trying to keep his composure. "But you'll work on my ranch, under my rules." "No," the man shook his head. "Under my rules. That's how it works when you accept to learn from someone." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Richard looked around and saw the expectant gazes of everyone. Some ranchers whispered among themselves, clearly betting on whether he'd have the courage to accept. Pride spoke louder than reason. "Fine," Richard said, extending his hand. 30 days. But when I win, you leave my property and never show your face here again." "Deal." The man shook his hand firmly. "My name is Walter Benjamin Johnson. And you?" "Richard Whitehall," he replied automatically, still dazed by what he'd just agreed to. "Pleasure, Richard. See you tomorrow before sunrise." Walter turned to Emperor, whispered something, and the bull stood up, calmly walking back to the pen. The crowd erupted in applause and excited chatter. Richard stood still, watching Walter walk away. He was already regretting the bet, but it was too late. The entire Texas countryside had witnessed the agreement. There was no backing out without completely losing his reputation. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He paced through the empty ranch house, thinking about what he'd done. The mansion, once full of life with Margaret and Michael around, now felt like a silent mausoleum. The walls covered in trophies and certificates of his business successes couldn't fill the emptiness he felt. He tried calling Margaret in New York, but it went to voicemail. She was probably busy with her painting classes or some social dinner. Michael, now 22, was studying business in the capital and rarely answered his calls. The young man had made it clear he didn't want to follow in his father's footsteps in ranching. At 4 in the morning, Richard finally dozed off in his office chair. He was woken 2 hours later by the sound of someone softly singing outside. He looked out the window and saw a figure moving in the stables. It was Walter, who had already arrived and started working. Richard put on his most expensive work clothes and went out to meet him. Walter was cleaning Emperor's stall, humming a song Richard didn't recognize. The bull seemed relaxed, chewing calmly. "You're here early," said Richard, trying to sound authoritative. "Animals wake with the sun," Walter replied without stopping his work. "It's their schedule, not ours." "Well, since you're here, I'll show you how things work on my ranch." Walter stopped working and looked Richard up and down. The rancher was wearing a spotless white dress shirt, leather pants, and expensive designer boots. "First, you need to change your clothes," Walter said. "What do you mean?" Richard took offense. "These clothes cost more than an economy car." "Exactly why. Animals smell fear and dishonesty. Expensive clothes carry the energy of someone who wants to show they're better than others." "That's ridiculous," Richard laughed nervously. "Then go up to Emperor dressed like that," Walter challenged. Richard approached the pen, but Emperor immediately stood up and began snorting, showing signs of agitation. The rancher instinctively stepped back. "See?" Walter said calmly. "He senses you're not being true to yourself." "But I wear these clothes every day for work," Richard protested. "You wear these clothes to show you're the boss, not to do real work." The remark hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He realized he hadn't gotten his hands dirty in years. He always supervised others' work, but never did the messy tasks himself. Reluctantly, he went home and put on an old outfit he found at the back of his closet. When he returned, Walter smiled approvingly. "Now we're talking. Let's begin." The first few days were torture for Richard. His hands, used only to holding papers and pens, were soon covered in blisters. His back ached from bending over to clean and feed the animals. Walter worked tirelessly, always humming or whispering to the creatures. On the third day, Richard noticed something that puzzled him. Walter slept outside the stable on an old mattress he'd brought. "Why don't you take a room in the staff quarters?" Richard asked. "I have plenty of empty ones." "I need to be near the animals," Walter replied simply. "They get nervous when they don't sense a friendly presence nearby." "That doesn't make sense. The handlers leave every day, and the animals are fine. The handlers do their job. I do my mission." "What mission?" Walter looked at Richard with an expression mixing sadness and determination. "Helping those in need. whether animals or people. That night, a fierce storm rolled in. Richard was woken by thunder and went to check on the stables. To his surprise, he found Walter out in the rain, calming Emperor, who was clearly spooked by the noise. "You'll catch your death out here," Richard shouted over the rain. "He needs me now," Walter replied, still stroking the bull's muzzle. Richard watched, fascinated. Emperor, who had always been skittish and aggressive, was behaving like a tame animal in Walter's hands. Not even the ranch's best handlers could calm him during storms. The next day, Richard called the vet for a routine checkup. Dr. Henry Morrison was a respected professional who had cared for the ranch's animals for over a decade. "Richard, I need to talk to you about Emperor," Dr. Henry said with concern. "What's wrong?" "'Cause he's sick. He's been losing weight since that man arrived, about 18 pounds in a week." Richard felt his blood run cold. Furious, he went to find Walter, who was in the pasture with some cows. "You're killing my bull!" he yelled, pointing at Walter. "What do you mean?" Walter asked calmly. "The vet said Emperor's lost 18 pounds since you got here. What did you do to him?" Walter sighed and stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Richard, your bull was sick. I changed his diet to start treatment." "What treatment? What sickness?" Richard was growing increasingly agitated. "Emperor has a severe intestinal infection. If left untreated, he might not make it past a few months." "That's a lie. He gets regular checkups." "Not all tests can detect this kind of problem in the early stages," Walter explained patiently. "I asked Dr. Henry to run more specific tests." 2 hours later, Dr. Henry called with the results. Richard answered with trembling hands. "Richard, I don't know how that man knew, but Emperor really does have a severe intestinal infection. It's at an advanced stage. If it hadn't been caught now..." Richard hung up in shock. Walter was on the other side of the pen, feeding Emperor a special blend of herbs he had prepared. "How did you know?" Richard asked, stepping closer. "Emperor told me," Walter replied without a hint of irony. "Cut the nonsense about talking to animals. How did you really know?" Walter stopped working and looked Richard straight in the eye. "I've spent 40 years of my life studying and working with animals. I learned to spot signs most people ignore. The way he breathed, how he positioned his body, how he reacted to certain movements. It all tells a story." 40 years? Richard did the math in his head. "What kind of work?" "I was a vet for a long time. Then I chose a different path." Richard was speechless. Walter wasn't just some drifter, as he had assumed. He was a trained professional who, for some reason, had chosen to live simply. By the second week, other animals on the ranch began showing remarkable changes. Cows that had stopped producing milk started again. Horses that were difficult to ride became docile. Even the ranch hands began seeking Walter's advice for problem animals. Richard watched it all with a mix of admiration and jealousy. Workers who had been with him for years now showed more respect for Walter than for him. It gnawed at him. "Joe," Richard called to his most senior foreman, "I need to talk to you." Joe Smith had worked on the ranch for 15 years. He was an honest, hard-working man, respected by everyone. "Yes, boss. I've noticed you and the others taking a lot of direction from this Walter. Don't forget who signs your paychecks here." Joe tipped his genuine leather cowboy hat, clearly uncomfortable. "Boss, with all due respect, Mr. Walter's teaching us things we never knew. The animals are calmer, healthier. The work's getting easier." "He's just some outsider who'll be gone in a few weeks," Richard said firmly. "Could be, boss, but while he's here, we might as well learn." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now back to the story. Joe's answer only made Richard angrier. He considered firing a few hands to make an example, but knew the other ranchers in the area would see it as arrogance. The bet had been public and everyone was watching. During the second week, Walter made an unusual request. "I need to visit some ranches in the area," he said after the day's work. "What for?" Richard asked suspiciously. "I need certain herbs to continue Emperor's treatment, and I want to see other animals in the area." "Absolutely not. You were hired to work here. The bet was that you'd work with me for 30 days, not that I'd be your prisoner." Richard had no comeback for that. Reluctantly, he accompanied Walter on his visits. The first stop was at the small property of Anthony Peterson, a farmer who raised a few head of cattle to make ends meet. "Mr. Peterson," Walter greeted the elderly man with respect. "Mind if I take a look at your animals?" Anthony, who must have been around 70, eyed Richard suspiciously. The two men had a complicated history. Years ago, Richard had tried to buy Anthony's property for well below market value when the farmer was going through financial difficulties. "What are you doing here, Richard?" Anthony asked coldly. "I'm not here for anything," Richard replied uncomfortably. "It's Walter who wants to see the animals." Walter spent the entire afternoon examining Anthony's few animals and offering advice on feeding and basic care. Richard watched in silence, seeing the gratitude in the old man's eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Richard asked when they returned to the ranch. "Doing what?" "Helping my competition." Walter stopped walking and looked at Richard with an expression that mixed surprise and disappointment. "Anthony isn't your competition. He has 5 cows. You have over 1,000 head of cattle. Even so, he sells milk and meat in the area. Richard, when all the animals in the region are healthy, the whole region benefits. Diseases don't respect fences. One sick animal can spread to others." "I never thought of it that way," Richard admitted reluctantly. "And besides," Walter continued, "Anthony is a good man trying to support his family with dignity. Why would you see that as a bad thing?" The question left Richard silent. For the first time in years, he was forced to question his own motivations and attitudes. In the following visits, Richard saw a side of the region he had forgotten existed. Small families struggling to survive, modest ranchers working miracles with few resources, people who treated their animals with genuine care and respect. At one small farm, Walter helped a family save a cow struggling to give birth. Richard watched Walter work tirelessly for hours, refusing any payment when the cow and calf pulled through. "Why did you do that for free?" Richard asked on the way back. "Why would I charge?" Walter replied with another question. "Because it's your work. Your knowledge has value." "My knowledge only has value if it's used to help. Hoarding knowledge for yourself is like hiding food while others go hungry." Richard grew thoughtful. He had always seen knowledge as power, something to be guarded to maintain a competitive edge. On the 10th day, something unexpected happened. Michael, Richard's son, showed up at the ranch unannounced. The 22-year-old was on break from college and had decided to visit his father. "Dad, who's that man working with Emperor?" Michael asked, watching Walter feed the bull. "It's a long story," Richard sighed. "He's helping me with the animals for a few weeks." Michael approached Walter, who was teaching some workers about handling techniques. The young man was fascinated by the knowledge Walter shared. "Can I tag along with you tomorrow?" Michael asked his father that evening. "You've never shown interest in the ranch," Richard replied, surprised. "I've never been interested in the way you ran the ranch," Michael corrected, "but what that man's doing seems different." The remark hit Richard like a slap in the face. He realized his own son saw him as a cold, calculating businessman, not someone who truly cared about animals or people. Michael began spending his days working with Walter and Richard. To the rancher's surprise, the young man showed a natural talent for handling animals. Walter taught with patience, explaining not just what to do but why to do it. "Daddy," Michael said one evening during dinner, "why did you never teach me these things?" "What things?" Richard asked, though he knew the answer. "To truly care about the animals, Walter doesn't see them as money-making machines. He treats them like beings who deserve respect." "I've always respected animals," Richard defended himself. "You kept them healthy so they'd be profitable. That's different." The distinction Michael made struck Richard deeply. He had never considered the difference between caring for animals for financial gain and caring for them out of genuine respect. On the 12th day, Margaret called the ranch. It was rare for her to call, so Richard grew concerned. "Richard, Michael told me about this man staying at the ranch. I'm worried." "Why?" Richard asked, though he knew Margaret worried about any change in routine. "Michael seems different, more interested in the ranch, more excited. I'm afraid you're manipulating our son into taking over the business." "Margaret, I'm not manipulating anyone. In fact, I think I'm learning just as much as he is." Learning? The surprise in Margaret's voice was evident. You've never admitted you needed to learn anything. Maybe that was my mistake, Richard admitted quietly. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Richard, are you all right? You don't sound like yourself. Maybe I'm finally sounding like myself for the first time in years. After hanging up, Richard reflected on the conversation. Margaret had left him because she felt he had become a different person over the years, harder, colder, more obsessed with financial success. On the 14th day, Emperor began showing signs of significant improvement. He had regained weight and seemed more active, but Walter decided to take the training a step further. Today, we'll teach Emperor to help with ranch work, Walter announced. How so? Richard asked, confused. He's a stud, not a work animal. Every animal likes to feel useful. Emperor is smart and strong. He can learn to help with simple tasks. Richard thought the idea absurd, but he had learned to trust Walter's judgment. All morning, Walter worked patiently with Emperor, teaching the bull to pull a small plow and respond to specific commands. To Richard's astonishment, Emperor seemed to be enjoying himself. The bull, once restless and aggressive, now worked calmly, following Walter's guidance with genuine interest. This is amazing, Michael remarked, watching the scene. Who knew Emperor could be trained like this? Walter has a special gift, Richard admitted. It's not a gift, Walter overheard and walked over. It's respect. When you treat an animal as a partner instead of property, they respond differently. That afternoon, a group of international buyers arrived at the ranch. They had heard of Emperor and wanted to make an offer. Mr. Whitehall, said the group's representative, an Argentine man named Charles Montgomery. We're offering $5 million for your stud bull. It was an extraordinary offer, far above market value. Richard felt his heart race. With that money, he could expand his business significantly. You can see the animal, Richard said, leading the group to Emperor's pen. When they arrived, they saw a surreal sight. Emperor was calmly helping Walter move hay from one place to another, following softly spoken commands. Incredible, Montgomery murmured. I've never seen a stud bull trained for work. That only increases his value. Would you like to see anything else? Richard asked, already thinking about the sales contract. We'd like to see how he responds to different handlers, said Montgomery. Richard called Joe, his foreman, to demonstrate. Joe approached Emperor, but the bull didn't respond to the commands. He stood still, completely ignoring the instructions. Let me try, said Richard, confident. After all, he was the bull's owner. But when Richard approached and tried to give commands, Emperor not only ignored him but also walked away and sat in a corner of the pen. Interesting, observed Montgomery. It seems the bull only obeys that specific man. Walter was on the other side of the pasture, working with other cows. Richard called him, but Walter waved, indicating he was busy. Gentlemen, Richard said nervously, perhaps we can discuss the sale tomorrow. The bull is a bit tired today. Of course, said Montgomery, but Richard noticed the buyer's interest had waned. We'll call tomorrow. When the buyers left, Richard confronted Walter. Why didn't you come when I called? I lost a $5 million sale. You want to sell Emperor? Walter asked calmly. Of course I do. It's an excellent deal. And after you sell him, what will happen to him? Not my problem. It'll be the buyer's problem. Walter shook his head sadly. Richard, Emperor trusts you. He's more than a business asset. He's a partner who helped build your reputation. Selling him would be like selling a friend. A friend? Richard laughed nervously. He's a bull, not a pet dog. Maybe to you. To him, you're the only family he knows. The remark made Richard uncomfortable. He'd never thought of Emperor in emotional terms. He'd always been just a valuable investment. And besides, Walter continued, he won't obey the new owners. You saw what happened today. Without me, he'll go back to being just an ordinary bull. Richard realized Walter was right. Emperor had become so attached to Walter that he now depended on him to demonstrate his special abilities. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On the 17th day, an unexpected drought hit the region. The smaller wells began to dry up, and the small ranchers panicked. Richard knew he had enough water on his property to last for months, but he didn't worry about his neighbors. "Richard," Walter came to him in the morning. "I need to show you something." Walter took Richard to a secluded area of the ranch near the border with other properties. There was a tall fence and signs reading, "Private property, no trespassing." "What's here?" Richard asked. "A natural water source you fenced off years ago." Richard remembered. He'd enclosed the area to ensure neighbors couldn't use his water during shortages. "It's my property, my water," he said defensively. "Look around." Walter pointed to the neighboring lands. "See those skinny cows over there on Anthony's property? They're dying of thirst while this water sits unused here." "Not my problem." "Richard, when animals and people suffer around you, it always ends up being your problem too. Diseases spread, the local economy weakens, the whole region suffers. I can't support the entire region. No one's asking you to, just to share a resource you have in excess." Richard looked at the abundant spring of crystal clear water. There really was far more than his ranch needed. "If I open this up, every rancher in the area will want to use it. It'll turn into a mess." "Or it could be a chance to lead by example," Walter suggested. That afternoon, Richard made a decision that surprised everyone. He had the fence torn down and put up a sign: "Free water, responsible use, requested." The news spread quickly. Within hours, ranchers from all over the region began arriving with water trucks and containers. Richard watched from his porch, seeing the gratitude on people's faces. Anthony was one of the first to arrive. He approached Richard with teary eyes. "Richard, I don't know how to thank you. My cows were almost—" "No need to thank me," Richard interrupted, surprised by his own response. "We're all in the same region. We have to help each other." That night, Richard felt different. There was a strange but good feeling in his chest. It took him a while to realize it was genuine happiness, something he hadn't felt in a long time. On the 19th day, Walter made an unexpected revelation. They were working together in the stable when Richard decided to ask more personal questions. "Walter, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "You said you were a veterinarian. How did you end up in this situation?" Walter stopped working and sat on an overturned bucket. He was silent for a few moments, as if deciding how much to share. "I had a veterinary clinic in Dallas. It was successful. I made a lot of money. Big house, imported car, all the comforts you could imagine." "What happened?" "I realized I was drifting away from why I chose to be a vet. I was only treating animals for wealthy people, charging prices only the elite could afford. Meanwhile, I saw humble folks losing their animals because they couldn't afford treatment. And then I decided to change. I started treating needy people for free. My wife didn't like it, said I was throwing our future away." "Did your wife leave you?" "Not only left, she took our daughter, said she couldn't live with a man who cared more about poor people's animals than his own family." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. The story had painful similarities to his own. "And your daughter?" "Sarah Beth. She was 15 when her mother took her away. She must be about 32 now. Haven't spoken to her in over 10 years. "Why?" "She believes I abandoned the family by choice. Her mother convinced her I was an irresponsible man who threw everything away on a whim." "And the clinic?" "Went under. When you treat more people for free than paying, it's hard to keep the bills paid. Lost everything: clinic, house, car, investments." "Do you regret it?" Walter was silent for a long time. "Losing my family, every day. The path I chose? Never. But you lost everything." "I lost everything I thought was important. But I gained something priceless: peace of mind." "Peace of mind doesn't pay the bills." "True. But money can't buy a good night's sleep either." Richard grew thoughtful. Walter had made choices opposite to his own, yet both had lost their families. The difference was, Walter seemed at peace with his decisions. On the 20th day, an unexpected event shook the ranch's routine. Emperor suddenly fell ill. Dr. Henry was urgently called and arrived with a grave expression. "Richard, I don't know what happened, but Emperor has a serious infection. It could be a reaction to the previous treatment or something entirely new. "What's the prognosis?" Richard asked, his heart tight. "Honestly, not good. If he doesn't respond to treatment in the next 48 hours, the doctor didn't need to finish." Richard felt his world collapse. Emperor wasn't just a valuable animal, he'd become a symbol of everything Richard had built. Walter took over Emperor's care completely. He spent the first entire night awake, applying compresses, administering medication, and whispering softly to the bull. Richard stayed by his side, watching. "You should rest," Richard said in the early hours. "He needs to know he's not alone," Walter replied without taking his eyes off the animal. "Walter, if anything happens to him, you win the bet. You can take the 20 million and rebuild your life." Walter looked at Richard with a surprised expression. "You think I'm here for the money?" "You're not?" Richard was confused. "Richard, money was never important to me. I came here because I saw a lost man who needed help, and because I saw a magnificent animal being treated like an object." "Then why did you accept the bet?" "Because it was the only way you'd let me help you. Your pride would never let you accept help for free." The revelation hit Richard like lightning. Walter wasn't interested in winning money. He was genuinely trying to help him. On the second night, Richard also stayed awake, caring for Emperor, working side by side with Walter, applying medicine and making compresses. It was then that he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money or business. He was simply worrying about a living being he cared for. "Walter," Richard said in the early hours, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When Emperor was born, I helped with the delivery myself. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I held him in my arms when he was just a scared little calf." "What changed?" "Success, I guess. Emperor started winning competitions, became worth a lot of money. Then he stopped being an animal I loved and turned into an investment I managed." "How do you feel about that now?" "Ashamed," Richard admitted. "Ashamed of losing the ability to love something without calculating its financial value." On the third night, Emperor finally began showing signs of improvement. His breathing became more regular, and he managed to drink a little water. "I think he'll be okay," Walter said, relieved. "Thanks to you," Richard said with genuine gratitude. "Thanks to both of us. You stayed here 3 nights in a row caring for him. That shows your heart is still in the right place. It's been years since I spent a sleepless night tending to an animal. Maybe that's why you lost your connection with them." "And with my family too," Richard murmured. "It's never too late to reconnect," Walter said softly. On the 25th day, with Emperor fully recovered, Richard made an important call. "Hello, Michael." "Hi, Dad, how's Emperor?" "Better. Listen, son, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you really have no interest in running the ranch in the future?" Michael was silent for a moment. "Dad, I've always been interested, just not in the way you ran it." "What do you mean?" "You always saw the ranch as a money-making machine. I see it as a place where you can nurture life, care for animals, contribute to the community." "What if I changed how I run things?" "How?" "What if we created something like an animal management school, teaching small ranchers how to better care for their animals, focusing on health and welfare instead of just profit?" "Dad, are you serious?" "Completely serious. I've been thinking about it. Walter could be the technical director. You could handle the administrative side, and I could provide the infrastructure. That would be amazing." Michael couldn't hide his excitement. "So you'd come back to the ranch?" "Dad, I'd come back today if you're serious." "I am. And Michael?" "Yes?" "Can you call your mother? Tell her I'd like to talk to her about some changes happening in my life." On the 27th day, Margaret arrived at the ranch. Richard waited nervously for her on the porch of the main house. It had been months since they'd seen each other in person. "Richard," she greeted formally. "Michael told me about your plans. I'm curious. Would you like to see what's changed around here first?" Richard took Margaret to meet Walter and see the work being done. She watched fascinated by the respectful interaction between Walter and the animals and the genuine enthusiasm Michael showed. "Who is this man?" asked Margaret. "A teacher," replied Richard. "Someone who taught me things I'd forgotten." "Like what?" "Like how to be human again." That evening, Richard and Margaret talked for hours on the porch. It was the first honest conversation they'd had in years. "Richard, what really changed?" asked Margaret. "I realized I spent years chasing things that didn't truly matter: money, status, power over others. And in the process, I lost what really mattered. You, Michael, the genuine joy of working with animals." "And what made you realize that?" "Walter. He showed me it's possible to be successful without being cruel. That you can lead by example, not intimidation. That you can make money by helping others, not stepping on them." "And do you believe you can really change?" "Margaret, I don't know if I can change completely. I'll probably make mistakes, maybe become stubborn in some situations again, but I want to try. And I want to try with you and Michael by my side." Margaret stayed silent for a long time. "Richard, I need time to think. You've changed a lot in just a few weeks, but I need to see if these changes last." "I understand. I just ask for a chance to prove they will." On the 28th day, workers from neighboring ranches began showing up to learn the techniques Walter was teaching. Word had spread about the impressive results he was achieving. "Walter," said Richard, "I have a proposal for you." "What is it?" "I want you to stay at the ranch permanently as technical director of the animal management school we want to create, with a fair salary, your own house, full benefits." "And the bet?" "The bet ended the moment you demonstrated the first command to Emperor. You proved your point, but now it's no longer about winning or losing, it's about building something important together." "I'll accept on one condition." "What?" "You keep working directly with the animals, don't go back to being just the administrator, keep your hands in the dirt." "Agreed." On the 29th day, Richard organized a meeting with all the ranchers in the area. He wanted to make a public announcement. The same pavilion where it all began was packed once more. Richard took the stage, but this time with a completely different demeanor. "Friends," Richard began, "a month ago I made a bet in this very place. A bet that changed my life completely." The crowd murmured, remembering the unusual situation. "Today I come to announce that I lost that bet. I lost the moment I made it, because it was based on arrogance and pride." Richard looked at Walter, who was in the audience next to Michael. "But losing that bet was the best thing that ever happened to me. I learned that true leadership doesn't come from displays of power, but from humility and service to others. That's why today I announce the creation of our region's Sustainable Animal Management School. It will be led by Walter Benjamin Johnson, one of the greatest animal behavior specialists I've ever known." The audience applauded enthusiastically. "The school will offer free courses for small ranchers and paid courses for larger producers. Our goal is to raise the standard of animal care across the entire region. And most importantly," Richard continued, "I want to publicly apologize to everyone who's been hurt by my arrogance over the years, especially to Mr. Anthony Peterson, whom I tried to take advantage of in difficult times." Anthony was in the crowd and nodded, visibly moved. "From now on, I want our region to be known not for cutthroat competition, but for cooperation and exemplary care for our animals." On the 30th and final day, the entire ranch was celebrating. Workers, neighbors, family, all were marking not just the end of the bet, but the beginning of a new era. Emperor, fully recovered, strolled calmly through the pasture alongside Walter and Richard. The bull seemed to understand something special was happening. "Walter," Richard said as they watched the sunset, "can I ask you one last question?" "Of course. Why did you really take that bet?" "The whole truth." Walter smiled, stroking Emperor's muzzle. "Because I saw in you the man I once was, obsessed with success, losing sight of what truly mattered. And because I believed that just as I managed to change, you could too. And if I hadn't changed, I'd have been sad but not regretful. It's worth trying to help someone, even if it doesn't work out. And your daughter, Sarah Beth, will you try to reach out to her now that you're back on your feet?" Walter was silent for a moment. "Maybe. Now that I have a story of hope to tell, maybe she'll listen." "Want me to help you find her?" "Richard, you have your own family to win back. Focus on that first." That evening, during the celebration dinner, Margaret pulled Richard aside for a private talk. "Richard, I've decided," she said. "Decided what?" he asked nervously. I'm coming back. I don't know if our marriage can be rebuilt, but I want to try. The changes I see in you seem real. Margaret, I promise I... Don't make promises, she interrupted. Just keep being this better version of yourself, day after day. Michael approached his parents, beaming. Dad, Mom, I have news. I'm dropping out of business school. Michael, Margaret gasped. Relax, Mom, I'm switching to veterinary medicine. I want to follow Walter's path and work with you all at the school. Richard felt tears welling in his eyes. His son had found purpose, his wife was returning, and he'd discovered a way to use his success to help others. 6 months later, the Sustainable Animal Management School was in full swing. Ranchers from across the region came to learn humane animal care techniques. Emperor had become something of a school mascot, showing visitors how animals respond when treated with respect. Walter lived in a comfortable home on the ranch and had become a respected figure throughout the area. Michael was studying veterinary medicine with renewed passion. Margaret had returned to the ranch and was helping manage the school's programs. And Richard? Richard had discovered something far better than being feared for his toughness, being respected for his generosity. One Sunday afternoon, as he watched Walter teach a group of children about animal care, Richard reflected on the past months. He'd lost a $20 million bet, but he'd gained something infinitely more valuable. He'd regained his humanity. Emperor approached and, as he often did now, lowered his head in affection. Richard stroked the bull's muzzle, remembering the day he'd held that same animal as a frightened calf. Thank you, my friend, he whispered to Emperor. Thank you for teaching me that some bets are meant to be lost. Walter appeared beside them, smiling. No regrets about losing that 20 million. Richard looked around, his wife painting watercolors in the garden, his son playing with the calves, smiling workers tending to the animals with respect and care, neighbors who now greeted him with genuine warmth. Walter, Richard said, I didn't lose 20 million. I invested $20 million in the best education of my life, and the return was infinitely greater than any amount of money. Emperor snorted softly, as if in agreement. And there, in the golden twilight of the Texas countryside, 3 unlikely friends, a transformed businessman, a wise man disguised as a beggar, and a bull who had taught them about dignity, stood together, contemplating a future full of possibilities. The bet had ended months ago, but the real victory was only just beginning. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of Richard's transformation? Do you believe people can truly change when they find the right teachers? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think about this story of perseverance and humility. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories.